Demonstrating the wide range of life on Earth, museums proliferated, taking the cabinets of curiosities from older generations and creating formal institutions, giving these newly amassed collections of animals, plants, and fossils new life. By the end of the 19th century, natural history was a more structured intellectual endeavor than it had been for centuries, and all of these new scientific endeavors needed practical grounding from field research. Lyell published geological profiles that showed evidence of glacial movements in the Alps. Darwin bred pigeons as an experiment to gather evidence for his theory of evolution by natural selection. He later bequeathed all 120 of his pigeon specimens to the Natural History Museum in London in 1867. The mid-19th century also marked the origin of Neanderthal research, beginning with the discovery of the species in the 1850s. Natural historians interested in the deep time of human past began looking to records of material culture, stone tools, and artifacts in systematic ways. It was the beginnings of what the 20th century would call methodology for archaeology and paleoanthropology. The stone tools and other artifacts gave substance and data to what new scientific theories and new disciplines meant for the longue durée of humanity's history. The Neanderthal story begins in August 1856, when limestone quarry workers blasted out the entrance to the Feldhofer Grotto in the Neander Valley of west-central Germany. Picking through the rubble, workers found a set of skeletal remains and turned the skull scraps, arm bones, ribs, and part of a pelvis over to one Johann Karl Flores, an amateur naturalist and local gymnasiat schoolteacher in Elberfeld. The workers assumed the bones were from an ancient cave bear. Flores' degree in natural sciences from the University of Bonn helped him to appreciate the uniqueness of the materials the workers had given him. Although he quickly recognized that the bones were humanesque and not ursid, he noted that the bones were unusual. The cranium was extremely thick and differed greatly in shape from that of a human skull. Moreover, the skull case was elongated, and the brow ridges above the eyes were almost ridiculously pronounced. Flores thought that the bones were most likely very old, since they had high mineral deposition on them, and their stratigraphic provenience, the location of their discovery in the cave sediments, showed that they were not recent additions to the cave. Flores' cursory examination of the bones led him to conclude that he wanted a second, more expert opinion, so he delivered the Neander Valley skeletal remains to famed professor of anatomy Hermann Schaffhausen at the University of Bonn. Schaffhausen was impressed by what he called the primitive form of the skull and the evidence for its geological antiquity. Flores had carefully questioned the quarry workers in order to substantiate his claim that the geological context of the skeletal materials really was old. According to both Schaffhausen and Flores, the bones were legitimately old and definitely human-like, but still very different from other skeletal remains of Homo sapiens. In addition to his expertise in human anatomy, Schaffhausen had the scientific connections to be able to introduce this curious find to a broader natural history community. Flores and Schaffhausen publicly announced the discovery and description of the bones in June 1857 at a Niederrheinische Gesellschaft für Natur- und Heilkunde meeting. Convinced that the Lower Rhine Medical and Natural History Society chapter, which met in Bonn, was the perfect opportunity to introduce their studies of the bones to an invested audience. Together, they argued that the bones represented an ancient race of humans that had belonged to the German area. The human bones from the Neanderthal, the two wrote, referencing the region of the fossil's discovery, exceed all the rest in those peculiarities of the conformation which lead to the conclusion of their belonging to a barbarous and savage race. Indeed, Schaffhausen argued in his presentation to the naturalist group that sufficient grounds exist for the assumption that man coexisted with the animals found in the diluvium, biblical flood.